What's going on, guys? It's Fatti here. Welcome back to another episode of reading, some books. Back on State and Revolution by Lenin, of course. Believe we left off after chapter 2 last time, so we're loaded into chapter 3 here. This is chapter 3. Experience of the Paris Commune of 1871, Marx's analysis. So let's just get right into it. Section 1. In what does the heroism of the communards consist? The communards? Already immature, sorry. It's well known that in the autumn of 1870, a few months prior to the Commune, Marx warned the Paris workers that an attempt to overthrow the government would be the folly of despair. But when, in March 1871, a decisive battle was forced upon the workers and they accepted it, when the uprising had become a fact, Marx welcomed the proletarian revolution with the greatest enthusiasm, in spite of unfavorable auguries. Marx did not assume the rigid attitude of pedantically condemning an untimely movement, as did the ill-famed Russian renegade from Marxism, Plekhanov, who in November 1905 wrote encouragingly about the workers' and peasants' struggle, but after December 1905 cried, liberal fashion, they should not have taken up arms. That sounds familiar. Marx, however, was not only enthusiastic about the heroism of the communards, who stormed the heavens, as he expressed himself. He saw in the mass revolutionary movement, although it did not attain its aim, an historic experiment of gigantic importance, a certain advance of the world proletarian revolution, a practical step more important than hundreds of programs and discussions. To analyze this experiment, to draw from it the lessons and tactics, to re-examine his theory in the new light it afforded, such was the problem as it presented itself to Marx. The only correction which Marx thought it necessary to make in the Communist Manifesto was made by him on the basis of the revolutionary experience of the Paris communards. I'm gonna be saying that word more than once every time I read it. I'm sorry in advance. Jesus, don't know what that word is. The last preface to a new German edition of the Communist Manifesto, signed by both its authors, is dated June 24, 1872. In this preface, the authors Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels say that the program of the Communist Manifesto is now in places out of date. Well, if it was out of date then, what the fuck? Sorry. The words within quotation marks in this passage are borrowed by its authors from Marx's book, The Civil War in France. It thus appears that one principal and fundamental lesson of the Paris Commune was considered by Marx and Engels to be of such enormous importance that they also introduced it as a vital correction into the manifesto itself. It is most characteristic that it is precisely this vital correction which has been distorted by the opportunists, and its meaning, probably, is not known to 9/10, if not 99 hundredths, what the of the readers of the Communist Manifesto. We shall deal with this distortion more fully further on, in a chapter devoted specially to distortions. It will be sufficient here to note that the current vulgar interpretation of Marx's famous utterance quoted above consists in asserting that Marx is here emphasizing the idea of gradual development in contradistinction to a seizure of power and so on. As a matter of fact, exactly the opposite is the case. Marx's idea is that the working class must break up, shatter the ready-made state machinery, and not confine itself merely to taking possession of it. On April 12, 1871, i.e. just at the time of the Commune, Marx wrote to Kugelmann, his bro Kugelmann. So we're quoting Marx. This is in a love letter. This is in a love letter to Kugelmann. He says, if you look at the last chapter of my 18th Brumaire, you will see that I declare that the next attempt of the French Revolution must be not, as in the past, to transfer the bureaucratic and military machinery from one hand to the other, but to break it up. Marx's italics, the original is zerbrechen. Yeah, well, okay. And this is the precondition of any real people's revolution on the continent. And this is what our heroic party comrades in Paris have attempted. In those words, to break up the bureaucratic and military machinery is contained, briefly formulated, the principal lesson of Marxism on the tasks of the proletariat in relation to the state during a revolution. And it is just this lesson which has not only been forgotten, but downright distorted by the prevailing Kautskyist interpretation of Marxism. As for Marx's reference to the 18th Brumaire, we have quoted above the corresponding passage in full. It's interesting to note two particular points in the passages of Marx quoted. First, he confines his conclusions to the continent. This was natural in 1871, when England was still the model of a purely capitalist country, but without a military machine and in large measure without a bureaucracy. Hence, Marx excluded England, where a revolution, even a people's revolution, could be imagined and was then possible without the preliminary condition of destroying the ready-made state machinery. Excuse me. Today, in 1917, 110 years ago, in the epoch of the First Great Imperialist War, this exception made by Marx is no longer valid. Both England and America, the greatest and last representatives of Anglo-Saxon liberty, in the sense of the absence of militarism and bureaucracy, have today plunged headlong into the all-European, dirty, bloody morass of military bureaucratic institutions to which everything is subordinated and which trample everything underfoot. Today, both in England and in America, the precondition of any real people's revolution is the breakup, the shattering of the ready-made state machinery brought in those countries between 1914 and 1917 to general European imperialist perfection. Secondly, particular attention should be given to Marx's extremely profound remark that the destruction of the military and bureaucratic apparatus of the state is the precondition of any real people's revolution. This idea of a people's revolution seems strange on Marx's lips, and the Russian Plekhanovists, and Mensheviks, those followers of Struve who wish to be considered Marxists, might possibly declare such an expression to be a slip of the tongue, a Freudian slip. Excuse me. They've reduced Marxism to such a state of poverty-stricken liberal distortion that nothing... Shit. I looked at my phone. Poverty-stricken liberal distortion that nothing exists for them beyond the distinction between bourgeois and proletarian revolution. And even that distinction they understand in an entirely lifeless way. Let me turn my ringer off. Hold on. It's a couple times now I got distracted. If we shall take, for examples, the revolutions of the 20th century, we shall, of course, have to recognize both the Portuguese and the Turkish revolutions as bourgeois. Neither, however, is a people's revolution, inasmuch as the mass of the people, the enormous majority, doesn't make its appearance actively independently with its own economic and political demands in either one or the other. Bummer. On the other hand, the Russian bourgeois revolution of 1905 through 1907, although it presented no such brilliant successes as at times fell to the lot of the Portuguese and Turkish revolutions, was undoubtedly a real people's revolution, since the mass of the people, the majority, the lowest social depths, crushed down by oppression and exploitation, were rising independently. Since they put on the entire course of the revolution the stamp of their demands, their attempts at building up, in their own way, a new society in place of the old society that was being shattered. In the Europe of 1871, the proletariat on the continent did not constitute the majority of the people. A people's revolution actually sweeping the majority into its current could be only such could be such only if it embraced both the proletariat and the peasantry, obviously. Both classes then constituted the people. Both classes are united by the circumstance that the bureaucratic and military state machinery oppresses, crushes, and exploits them. To shatter this machinery, to break it up, this is the true interest of the people, of its majority, the workers and most of the peasants. This is the preliminary condition of a free union of the poorest peasantry with the proletarians. While without such a union, democracy is unstable and socialist reorganization is impossible. Towards such a union, as is well known, the Paris Commune was making its way, though it did not reach its goal, owing to a number of circumstances, internal and external. Consequently, when speaking of a real people's revolution, Marx, without the least forgetting the peculiar characteristics of the petty bourgeoisie, he spoke of them much and often, was very carefully taking into account the actual interrelation of classes in most of the continental European states in 1871. On the other hand, he stated that the breaking up of the state machinery is demanded by the interests both of the workers and of the peasants, and it unites them, that it places before them the common task of removing the parasite and replacing it by something new. But by what, exactly? So that's where we get into Section 2. What is to replace the shattered state machinery? This is a good question. A lot of people ask, okay, you have this revolution, then what after that? A lot of people who are call themselves progressives or something, but are not wanting to call themselves a socialist, or maybe they call themselves a democratic socialist or a social democrat. That type of thing. They're very skeptical of what do you replace this with then that isn't going to be subject to the same corruption and imperialist, bullshit. So this is an important section for me because I don't know this stuff. So shall we just read on and find out? Okay. In 1847, in the Communist Manifesto, Marx answered this question still in a purely abstract manner, stating the problems rather than the methods is solving them. To replace this machinery by, quote, the proletariat organized as the ruling class, by establishing democracy, such was the answer of the Communist Manifesto. Without resorting to utopias, Marx waited for the experience of a mass movement to produce the answer to the problem, as to the exact forms which this organization of the proletariat as the ruling class will assume, and as the exact manner in which the organization will be combined with the most complete, most consistent establishment of democracy. The experiment of the Commune, meager as it was subjected by Marx to the most careful analysis in his The Civil War in France. Let us quote the most important passages of his work. Oh, shit, okay. The most important passages of his work. That's good. They're developed in the 19th century, he says, originating from the days of absolute monarchy, the centralized state power with its ubiquitous organs of standing army, police, bureaucracy, clergy, and judicature. Don't know if I said that right. With the development of class antagonism between capital and labor, the state power assumed more and more the character of the national power of capital over labor, of a public force organized for social enslavement, of an engine of class despotism. After every revolution marking a progressive phase in the class struggle, the purely repressive character of the state power stands out in bolder and bolder relief. The state power after the revolution of 1848 to 1849 became the national war engine of capital against labor. The Second Empire consolidated this. The direct antithesis of the empire was the Commune, says Marx. It was the positive form of a republic that was not only to supersede the monarchical form of class rule, but class rule itself. What was this positive form of the proletarian, the socialist republic? What was the state it was beginning to create? The first decree of the Commune was the suppression of the standing army and the substitution for it of the armed people, says Marx. This demand now figures in the program of every party calling itself socialist. But the value of their programs is best shown by the behavior of our socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks, who even after the revolution of March 12, 1917, refused to carry out this demand in practice. The Commune was formed of municipal councillors chosen by universal suffrage in various wards of the town, responsible and revocable at short terms. The majority of its members were naturally working men or acknowledged representatives of the working class. Instead of continuing to be the agent of the central government, the police was at once stripped of its political attributes and turned into the responsible and at all times revocable agent of the Commune. So were the officials of all other branches of the administration. From the members of the Commune downwards, the public service had to be done at workmen's wages. The vested interests of the representation allowances of the high dignitaries of state disappeared along with the high dignitaries themselves. Having once got rid of the standing army and the police, the physical force elements of the old government, the Commune was anxious to break the spiritual force of repression, the parson power. The judicial functionaries were to be divested of their sham independence. Like the rest of public servants, magistrates and judges were to be elective, responsible, and revocable. Yeah, I mean, that's common sense, you know. Revocable is the biggest thing. And as far as I've been told, as far as I've read, even though a place like China is more closely to a state capitalism, the people serving in government are revocable, from what I've read. So it can be done. And as far as I'm concerned, even a DPRK, the council people are revocable. Now, obviously, there's not as much we know about DPRK because they're very isolationist, but you know, they do that strategically, obviously. But I do think it's the revocable is the thing. Is you know, in the United States, you serve 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, whatever. But if you get elected, you can immediately do something so fucked up, fucking over your constituents, for money, essentially. Donors give you something, and now you're going to pass a bill that's fucking over your constituents. And then, really, just the rest of your term, you're just working to basically gaslight your constituents into why that was actually a good thing, and you should just re-elect me next time. But in a just society, as soon as this motherfucker passes this bill that is fucked, he should be fucking yanked out of there, you know? In the same way, if you're playing a baseball game and the pitcher goes in, immediately throws a fucking meatball, gives up a home run, yank the motherfucker, right? So, yeah, revocable. Revoke his ass, fam. So, moving on. Thus, the Commune would appear to have replaced the shattered state machinery only by fuller democracy. Abolition of the standing army, all officials to be fully elective and subject to recall. But, as a matter of fact, this only signifies a gigantic replacement of one type of institution by others of a fundamentally different order. Here we observe a case of transformation of quantity into quality. Democracy. Democracy, introduced as fully and consistently as is generally thinkable, is transformed from capitalist democracy into proletarian democracy, from the state into something which is no longer really the state and is accepted in the sense of the word. It is still necessary to suppress the bourgeoisie and crush its resistance. This was particularly necessary for the Commune, and one of the reasons of its defeat was that it did not do this with sufficient determination. but the organ of suppression is now the majority of the population and not a minority, and was always the case under slavery, serfdom, and wage labor. And once the majority of the people itself suppresses its oppressors, a special force for suppression is no longer necessary. In this sense, the state begins to wither away. Instead of the special institutions of a privileged minority, such as privileged officialdom, heads of a standing army, and such, the majority can itself directly fulfill all these functions. And the more the discharge of the functions of state power devolves upon the people generally, the less need there is for an existence of this power. I see what they're saying, If, you wouldn't need an FBI, if you're only really looking after about 800 billionaires. If one of them's acting up, the whole town just goes after him, right? Quite literally chase the motherfucker out with pitchforks and torches, right? And take his shit. I don't know. Let's see. In this connection, the Commune's measure, emphasized by Marx, particularly worthy of note, is the abolition of all representation allowances and of all money privileges in the case of the officials, the reduction of the remuneration of all servants of the state to workmen's wages. Here is shown more clearly than anywhere else the break from a bourgeois democracy to a proletarian democracy, from the democracy of the oppressors to the democracy of the oppressed classes, from the state as a special force for suppression of a given class to the suppression of the oppressors by the whole force of the majority of the people, the workers and the peasants. And it is precisely on this most striking point, perhaps, the most important as far as the problem of the state is concerned, that the teachings of Marx have been entirely forgotten. In popular commentaries, whose number is legion, this is not mentioned. It is proper to keep silent about it, as if it were a piece of old-fashioned naivete, just as the Christians, after Christianity had attained the position of a state religion, forgot the naivetes of primitive Christianity with its democratic revolutionary spirit. In terms of reducing servants of the state to workmen's wages, every House representative or Senate cuck, right, should make the minimum wage in their state. That's my opinion. Federal minimum wage is still $7.25. There's still a few states that do that. Mine is one of them. Minimum wage in my state is still $7.25. But some places it's, California is much higher. So I think, if you're a representative of Kansas, per se, and your state minimum wage is $10 an hour, then that's what you should make. I don't know. That's just me. Because then, maybe, they'd fucking increase it, right? Because these fuckers, make $100,000 to not show up for work half the time and fuck over their constituents. Well, if you're making $10 an hour now, maybe then you'd actually fight to increase that. Just a thought. No, okay. The reduction of the remuneration of the highest state officials seems simply a demand of naive, primitive democracy. One of the founders of modern opportunism, the former social democrat Edward Bernstein, has more than once exercised his talents in repeating the vulgar bourgeois jeers at primitive democracy. Like all opportunists, including the present Kotskyists, he fails completely to understand. He fails completely failed to understand that, first of all, the transition from capitalism to socialism is impossible without return in a measure to primitive democracy. How can one otherwise pass on the discharge of all state functions by the majority of the population and by every individual of the population? And secondly, he forgets that the primitive democracy on the basis of capitalism and capitalist culture is not the same primitive democracy as in prehistoric or pre-capitalist times. Capitalist culture has created a large-scale production, factories, railways, the postal service, telephones, etc. And on this basis, the great majority of functions of the old state power have become so simplified and can be reduced to such simple operations of registration, filing, and checking that they will be quite within the reach of every literate person, and it will be possible to perform them for working men's wages, which circumstance can and must strip those functions of every shadow of privilege and every appearance of official grandeur. So it seems like some of these opportunists were basically calling out socialist revolutions and stuff as mob rule and saying that that's primitive and barbaric. And he's basically arguing that that's fuck off, basically. That's what it seems like. That's what it seems like. And I'm not against that. I know a bunch of conservatives back, maybe 10 years ago when the SJW shit was like, it was all the rage to be roasting SJWs, and cancel culture was still new. All these bigots and conservatives were butthurt, saying you can't just have mob rule and somebody says something you don't like and then the angry mob comes after them. Well, why not? Think about human beings as a primitive species. Fucking, if there's like 150 of you and somebody's doing something that everybody doesn't like, what is wrong with everybody telling that guy to fucking skedaddle? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Maybe that would teach that one guy not to fucking piss off everybody, right? And in the same vein, if there was 150 people and one guy is hogging all the resources and food and blankets and such, what's wrong with the 149 people taking his shit and kicking him the fuck out of the village, right? There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is somebody trying to fucking hog all this shit from his village. If somebody in your neighborhood was like stealing everyone's shit, you had shit in your garage. This motherfucker's coming around every night stealing shit out of your garage. Everyone. Wouldn't everyone fucking go down to that guy's house and say, what the fuck are you doing, dude? Give us our fucking shit back. I mean, at its core, that's what mob rule is. There's nothing wrong with that. So I don't understand why the whole idea of the mob rule shit being a bad thing, it's ridiculous. It's common sense. If someone's fucking over everybody and everybody agrees this is bullshit, fucking kick him the fuck out. Cancel me. I don't give a fuck. Cancel me. Just my opinion. I'm just some fuck. All officials, without exception, elected and subject to recall at any time, their salaries reduced to working men's wages, these simple and self-evident democratic measures, which completely uniting the interests of the workers and the majority of peasants, at the same time serve as a bridge leading from capitalism to socialism. These measures refer to the state, to the purely political reconstruction of society, but of course, they acquire their full meaning and significance only in connection with the expropriation of the expropriators, either accomplished or in preparation, i.e. with the turning of capitalist private ownership of the means of production into social ownership. Marx wrote, the Commune made that catchword of bourgeois revolutions, cheap government, a reality by destroying the two greatest sources of expenditure, the standing army and state functionarism. Functionarism. Yeah, well, I'm an idiot, so I don't know what the fuck. I mean, I get the word, but I've never seen that. Functionarism. From the peasantry, as from other sections of the petty bourgeoisie, only an insignificant few rise to the top, occupy a place in the sun. In the bourgeois sense, i.e., become either well to do people or secure and privileged officials. The great majority of peasants in every capitalist country where the peasantry exists, and the majority of capitalist countries are of this kind, is oppressed by the government and longs for its overthrow, longs for cheap government. This can be realized only by the proletariat, and by realizing it, the proletariat makes, at the same time, a step forward towards the socialist reconstruction of the state. Period. Clock it. Section 3, the destruction of parliamentarism. The commune, says Marx, was to be a working, not a parliamentary body, executive and legislative at the same time. Instead of deciding once in 3 or 6 years which member of the ruling class was to represent the people in Parliament, universal suffrage was to serve the people, constituted in communes, as individual suffrage serves every other employer in the search for the working men and managers in his business. This remarkable criticism of parliamentarism made in 1871 also belongs to the forgotten words of Marxism, thanks to the prevalence of social chauvinism and opportunism. Ministers and professional parliamentarians, traitors to the proletariat and socialist sharks of our day, have left all criticism of parliamentarism to the anarchists, and on this wonderfully intelligent ground denounce all criticism of parliamentarism as anarchism. It is not surprising that the proletariat of the most advanced parliamentary countries, being disgusted with such socialisms as Messrs. Schneemann, David, Lagine, Sembat, Ronaldo, Henderson, Van der Velde, Stoning, Branting, Bisalati, and co. These are just a bunch of fuckers, I guess. Have been giving its sympathies more and more to anarcho-syndicalism, in spite of the fact that it is but the twin brother of opportunism. Damn, anarcho-syndicalism is the twin brother of opportunism. I would like more explanation on that. Because I have friends that are anarcho-syndicalists. I guess I don't know, so I wouldn't know. But Lenin just talks shit, basically. But to Marx, revolutionary dialectics was never the empty, fashionable phrase, the toy rattle, which Plekhanov, Kautsky, and the others have made it. Marx knew how to break with anarchism ruthlessly for its inability to make use of the stable of bourgeois parliamentarism, especially at a time when the situation was not revolutionary. But at the same time, he knew how to subject the parliamentarism to a really revolutionary proletarian criticism. To decide once every few years which member of the ruling class is to repress and oppress the people through the parliament, this is the real essence of bourgeois parliamentarism, not only in parliamentary constitutional monarchies, but also in the most democratic republics. America! I was just saying that. But if the question of the state is raised, if parliamentarism is to be regarded as one institution of the state, what then, from the point of view of the tasks of the proletariat, is this realm, is to be the way out of parliamentarism? How can we do without it, basically? Again and again, we must repeat, the teaching of Marx, based on the study of the Commune, has been so completely forgotten that any criticism of parliamentarism other than anarchist or reactionary is quite unintelligible to a present-day, quote, social democrat. The way out of parliamentarism is to be found, of course, not in the abolition of the representative institutions and the elective principle, but in the conversion of the representative institutions from mere talking shops into working bodies. The Commune was to be a working, not a parliamentary body, executive and legislative at the same time. A working, not a parliamentary body. This hits the vital spot of the present day parliamentarians and parliamentary social democratic lapdogs. Take any parliamentary country from America to Switzerland, from France to England, Norway, and so forth. The actual work of the state there is done behind the scenes and is carried out by the departments, the offices, and the staffs. Parliament itself is given up to talk for the special purpose of fooling the common people. This is so true that even the Russian Republic, a bourgeois democratic republic, all these aims of parliamentarism, god damn, I can't fucking read, were immediately revealed, even before a real parliament was created. Such heroes of rotten Philistinism as the Skobalevs and the Tseretellis, Chernovs, and Avksentyevs, fuck, dude, I'm so American, have managed to pollute even the Soviets after the model of the most despicable petty bourgeois parliamentarism by turning them into hollow talking shops. In the Soviets, the right honorable socialist ministers are fooling the confiding peasants with the phrase-mongering and revolutions. In the government itself, a sort of permanent quadrille is going on in order that, on the one hand, as many SRs and Mensheviks as possible may get the gravy, the soft jobs, and on the other hand, the attention of the people may be occupied. All the while, the real state business is being done in the offices, in the staffs. The Dielo Naroda, organ of the ruling Socialist Revolutionary Party, recently admitted in an editorial article with the incomparable candor of people of good society in which all are engaged in political prostitution, that even in those ministries which belong to the socialists, the whole bureaucratic apparatus remains essentially the same as of old, working as of old, and freely obstructing revolutionary measures. Even if we did not have this admission, would not the actual history of the participation of the SRs and Mensheviks in the government prove this? It is only characteristic that while in ministerial company with the cadets Messrs. Chernov, Rusanov, Zenzinov, and other editors of the Dielo Naroda have so completely lost all shame that they unblushingly proclaim, as if it were a mere bagatelle, that in their ministries everything remains as of old. Revolutionary democratic phrases to gull the simple Simons. Bureaucracy and red tape for the benefit of the capitalists. Here you have the essence of the honorable coalition. To me, that, it reads a little bit like the progressives in Congress, right? The squad, right? I don't know. The venal and rotten parliamentarism of bourgeois society is replaced in the commune by institutions in which freedom of opinion and discussion does not degenerate into deception, for the parliamentarians must themselves work, must themselves execute their own laws, must themselves verify their results in actual life, must themselves be directly responsible to their electorate. Representative institutions remain, but parliamentarism as a special system, as a division of labor between the legislative and executive functions, as a privileged position for the deputies, no longer exists. Without representative institutions, we cannot imagine democracy, not even a proletarian democracy. But we can and must think of democracy without parliamentarism. If criticism of bourgeois society is not mere empty words for us, if the desire to overthrow the rule of the bourgeoisie is our serious and sincere desire, and not a mere election cry for catching working men's votes, as it is with the Mensheviks and SRs, the Schneidemans, the Legions, the Sembats, and the Vanderveldes. It reads a little bit like Bernie, But of course, it's completely different in America. There's like 5 people in Congress that claim to be progressive or democratic socialist, right? So it doesn't even really count. They're just kind of there just so that baby leftists don't completely tweak, essentially, I guess. so that they still have some hope and they feel represented in some way, even though we know you're not doing nothing, you know? You're the same as the fucking corporate Democrats. It's just, you get to come out and be like, I love working people. Yeah, well, act like it then. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Oh, fuck, I lost my place. Okay, no, we're good. It is most instructive to notice that in speaking to the functions of those officials who are necessary, both in the commune and in the proletarian democracy, Marx compares them with the workers of every other employer, that is, of the usual capitalist concern with its workers and managers. There's no trace of utopianism in Marx, in this sense of inventing or imagining a new society. No, he studies, as a process of natural history, the birth of the new society from the old, the forms of transition from the latter to the former. He takes the actual experience of a mass proletarian movement and tries to draw practical lessons from it. He learns from the commune, as all great revolutionary thinkers have not been afraid to learn from the experience of great movements of the oppressed classes, never preaching them pedantic sermons, such as Plekhanov's "They should not have taken up arms" or Tseretelli's "A class must know how to limit itself" bullshit. You know, and that's where someone like Bernie, every chance Bernie gets, he betrays the working class. Anytime the working class performs any action at all against its oppressors, suddenly, violence isn't the answer. We need to do this professionally, you know what I mean? Like, every chance he gets, he will, you know what I mean? And that's what's frustrating and exhausting as someone who used to, you know, have faith in the institutions itself in America. Like, I grew up a Democrat, started getting sucked down the alt-right pipeline as a teenager, if you could believe that. Then became a Democrat again. I was a Yang supporter in 2020, actually. And really the pandemic is kind of what eroded my faith in American institutions. And every day I see more and more the, you know, betrayal and people like Bernie who claim to be a socialist, right? But at every single turn, they prove that they're not, you know? Every chance they get, they will fucking shit talk the working class in favor of the ruling class. Every time, dude. When it comes to Israel and Palestine, every chance he gets, he will say that Israel has a right to exist and defend itself. Every chance he gets, bro. Anyway, moving on. That's not what we're talking about. Okay, here we go. To destroy officialdom immediately, everywhere, and completely, this cannot be thought of. That is utopia. But to break up at once the old bureaucratic machine and to start immediately the construction of a new one, which will enable us gradually to reduce all officialdom to naught, this is no utopia. This is the experience of the commune. It's the direct and urgent task of the revolutionary proletariat. Capitalism simplifies the functions of state administration. It makes it possible to throw off commanding methods and to reduce everything to a matter of the organization of the proletarians, hiring working men and managers in the name of the whole of society. We're not utopians. We don't indulge in dreams of how best to do away immediately with all administration, with all subordination. These anarchist dreams, based upon a lack of understanding of the task of proletarian dictatorship, are basically foreign to Marxism. And as a matter of fact, they serve but to put off the socialist revolution until human nature is different. No, we want the socialist revolution with human nature as it is now, with human nature that cannot do without subordination, control, and managers. But if there be subordination, it must be to the armed vanguard of all the exploited and the laboring, to the proletariat. The specific commanding methods of the state officials can and must begin to be replaced immediately, within 24 hours, by the simple functions of managers and bookkeepers, functions which are now already within the capacity of the average city dweller and can well be performed for working men's wages within 24 hours. I want you to fucking get on this. That's just funny to me. We organize large-scale production, starting from without capitalism has already created. No, starting from what capitalism has already created. We workers ourselves, relying on our own experience as workers, establishing a strict and iron discipline, supported by the state power of the armed workers, shall reduce the role of the state officials to that of simply carrying out our instructions as responsible, moderately paid managers. Of course, with technical knowledge of all sorts, types, and degrees. This is our proletarian task. With this, we can and must begin when carrying through a proletarian revolution. Such a beginning on the basis of large-scale production of itself leads to the gradual withering away of all bureaucracy, to the gradual creation of a new order, an order without quotation marks, an order which has nothing to do with wage slavery, an order in which the more and more simplified functions of control and accounting will be performed by each in turn, will then become a habit, and will finally die out as a special functions of a special stratum of the population. A witty German social democrat of the 70s of the last century called it, the 1870s, called the post office an example of the socialist system. This is very true. At present, the post office is a business organized on the lines of a state capitalist monopoly. Imperialism is gradually transforming all trusts into organizations of a similar type. Above the common workers who are overloaded with work and starving, there stands here the same bourgeois bureaucracy. But the mechanism of social management is here already to hand. Overthrow the capitalists, crush with the iron hand of the armed workers the resistance of these exploiters, break the bureaucratic machine of the modern state, and you have before you a mechanism of the highest technical equipment, freed of parasites, capable of being set into motion by the united workers themselves, who hire their own technicians, managers, bookkeepers, and pay them all, as indeed every state official, with the usual worker's wage. Here is a concrete, predictable task, immediately realizable in relation to all trusts, a task that frees the workers of exploitation and makes use of the experience which the Commune began to reveal in practice. To organize the whole national economy, like the postal system, in such a way that the technicians, managers, bookkeepers, as well as all officials, should receive no higher wages than working men's wages, all under the control and leadership of the armed proletariat, this is our immediate aim. This is the kind of state and economic basis we need. This is what will produce the destruction of parliamentarism while retaining representative institutions. This is what will free the laboring classes from the prostitution of these institutions by the bourgeoisie. Jesus Christ. Got a few more pages in this chapter, so hang in there. I know it's a long one. So, Section 4, the organization of national unity. In a rough sketch of national organization, which the Commune had no time to develop. Sorry, my throat's getting scratchy. Okay, there we go. In a rough sketch of national organization, which the Commune had no time to develop, it states clearly that the Commune was to be a political form of even the smallest country hamlet. From these communes would be elected the national delegation at Paris. The few but important functions which still would remain for central government were not to be suppressed, as has been intentionally misstated, but were to be discharged by communal and therefore strictly responsible agents. The unity of the nation was not to be broken, but, on the contrary, to be organized by the communal constitution, and to become a reality by the destruction of the state power, which claimed to be the embodiment of that unity, independent of and superior to the nation itself, from which it has but a parasitic excrescence. I don't know what the fuck. Excreting parasite. I don't know, something like that. While the merely repressive organs of the old governmental power were to be amputated, its legitimate functions were to be wrested from an authority usurping preeminence over society itself and restored to the responsible agents of society. To what extent the opportunists of contemporary social democracy have failed to understand, or perhaps it would be more true to say did not want to understand, these observations of Marx is best shown by the famous Herostrates fashion book of the renegade Bernstein, Dia Voraskadunskun. Okay, I'm not. It's in German. I'm not reading it. It's a book, and it's long, and it's a German title. Die Voraussetzungen des Sozialismus and die Aufgaben der Sozialdemokratie. Okay. Good. All right, moving on. We embarrassed myself, humiliated myself, trying to read in German. And moving on. It is just in connection with the above passage that Marx... Sorry. It is just in connection with the above passage from Marx that Bernstein wrote, saying that this program, in its political content, displays in all its essential features the greatest similarity to the federalism of Proudhon. Proudhon. Someone said that I pronounced that wrong, but they didn't say how to pronounce it. I never Googled it. Sorry. In spite of all the other points of difference between Marx and the petty bourgeois Proudhon, Bernstein places the words petty bourgeois in quotation marks in order to make them sound ironical. Jesus Christ. On these points, their ways of thinking resemble each other as closely as could be. Of course, Bernstein continues, the importance of the municipalities is growing, but it seems to me doubtful whether the first task of democracy would be such a dissolution of the modern states and such a complete transformation of their organization as is described by Marx and Proudhon. The formation of a national assembly from delegates to the provincial or district assemblies, which in their turn would consist of delegates from the communes, so that the whole previous mode of national representation would vanish completely. This is really monstrous. Thus, to confuse Marx's views on the destruction of the state power of the parasitic excrescence with the federalism of Proudhon. But this is no accident, for it never occurs to the opportunist that Marx is not speaking here at all of federalism as opposed to centralism, but of the destruction of the old bourgeois state machinery which exists in all bourgeois countries. To the opportunist occurs only what he sees around him in a society of petty bourgeois philistinism and reformist stagnation, namely only municipalities. As for a proletarian revolution, the opportunist has forgotten even how to imagine it. It is amusing, but it is remarkable that on this point nobody argued against Bernstein. Bernstein has been refuted often enough, especially by Plekhanov in Russian literature and by Kautsky in European, but neither made any remark upon this perversion of Marx by Bernstein. To such an extent has the opportunist forgotten to think in a revolutionary way and forgotten how to reflect on revolution that he attributes federalism to Marx, mixing him up with the founder of anarchism, Proudhon. And Kautsky and Plekhanov, anxious to be orthodox Marxists and to defend the teaching of the revolutionary Marxism, are silent on this point. Herein lies one of the roots of the vulgarization of the ideas concerning the difference between Marxism and anarchism, which is common to both Kautskyists and opportunists, which we shall discuss later. Federalism is not touched upon in Marx's observations about the experience of the Commune, as quoted above. Marx agrees with Proudhon precisely on that point, which has quite escaped the opportunist Bernstein. Marx differs from Proudhon just on the point where Bernstein sees their agreement. Marx agrees with Proudhon in that they both stand for the destruction of the contemporary state machinery. This common ground of Marxism with anarchism, neither the opportunists nor the Kautskyists wish to see, for on this point they themselves departed from Marxism. Marx differs both from Proud and I keep saying I don't know how to say it. Sorry. Bakunin, Proudhon and Bakunin, precisely on the point of federalism, not to speak of the dictatorship of the proletariat. But federalism arises as a principle from the petty bourgeois views of anarchism. Marx is a centralist. In the above quoted observations of his, there is no deviation from centralism. Only people full of petty bourgeois superstitious faith in the state can mistake the destruction of the bourgeois state for the destruction of centralism. But will it not be centralism if the proletariat and the poorest peasantry take the power of the state in their own hands, organize themselves freely into communes, and unite the action of all communes in striking at capital and crushing the resistance of the capitalists in the transfer of private property in railways, factories, land, and so forth to the entire nation, to the whole of society? Will that not be the most consistent democratic centralism? And proletarian centralism at that? Sorry. Bernstein simply cannot conceive the possibility of voluntary centralism, of a voluntary union of the communes into a nation, a voluntary fusion of the proletarian communes in the process of destroying bourgeois supremacy and the bourgeois state machinery. Like all Philistines, Bernstein can imagine centralism only as something from above, to be imposed and maintained solely by means of bureaucracy and militarism. Marx, as though he foresaw the possibility of the perversion of his ideas, purposely emphasizes that the accusation against the commune that it desired to destroy the unity of the nation, to do away with central power, was a deliberate falsehood. Marx purposely uses the phrase to organize the unity of the nation so as to contrast conscious democratic proletarian centralism to bourgeois military bureaucratic centralism. But no one is so deaf as he who will not hear. The opportunists of contemporary social democracy do not, on any account, want to hear of destroying the state power and cutting off the parasite. So now, section 5. We got a page and a half. We're nearly there, folks. We're nearly there. This is number 5, section 5. Destruction of the parasite state. We've already quoted part of Marx's statements on this subject and must now complete his presentation. It is generally the fate of completely new historical creations, wrote Marx, to be mistaken for the counterpart of older and even defunct forms of social life, to which they may bear a certain likeness. Thus, this new commune, which breaks the modern state power, has been mistaken for a reproduction of the medieval communes, for a federation of small states, for an exaggerated form of the ancient struggle against over-centralization. The communal constitution would have restored to the social body all the forces hitherto absorbed by the state parasite feeding upon and clogging the free movements of society. By this one act, it would have initiated the regeneration of France. The communal constitution brought the rural producers under the intellectual lead of the central towns of their districts, and there secured to them in the working man the natural trustees of their interests. The very existence of the commune involved, as a matter of course, the local municipal liberty, but no longer as a check upon the now superseded state power. Breaks the modern state power, which was a parasitic excrescence, its amputation, its destruction. The now superseded state power. These are the expressions used by Marx regarding the state when he appraised and analyzed the experience of the commune. All this was written a little less than half a century ago, much more now. And now one has to undertake excavations, as it were, in order to bring uncorrupted Marxism to the knowledge of the masses. The conclusions drawn from the observation of the last great revolution, through which Marx lived, have been forgotten, just as the moment when the time had arrived for the next proletarian revolutions. The multiplicity of interpretations to which the commune has been subjected, and the multiplicity of interest which it which construed it in their favor, show that it was a thoroughly expansive political form, while all previous forms of government had been emphatically repressive. Its true secret was this: it was essentially a working class government, the product of the struggle of the producing against the appropriating class. The political form at last discovered under which to work out the economical emancipation of labor. Except on this last condition, the communal constitution would have been an impossibility and a delusion. The utopians busied themselves with the discovery of the political forms under which the socialist reconstruction of society could take place. The anarchists turned away from the question of political forms altogether. The opportunists of modern social democracy accepted the bourgeois political forms of a parliamentary democratic state as the limit which cannot be overstepped. They broke their foreheads praying before this idol, denouncing as anarchism every attempt to destroy these forms. Marx deducted from the whole history of socialism and political struggle that the state was bound to disappear, that the transitional form of its disappearance would be the proletariat organized as a ruling class. But Marx did not undertake the task of discovering the political forms of the future stage. He limited himself to an exact observation of French history, its analysis, and the conclusion to which the year 1851 had led. That matters were moving towards the destruction of the bourgeois machinery of state. And when the mass revolutionary movement of the proletariat burst forth, Marx, in spite of the failure of that movement, in spite of his short life and its patent weakness, in spite of its short life and its patent weakness, began to study what political forms it had disclosed. The commune in this form, at last discovered by the proletarian revolution, under which the economic liberation of labor can proceed. The commune is the first attempt of a proletarian revolution to break up the bourgeois state machinery, and constitutes the political form, at last discovered, which can and must take the place of the broken machine. We shall see below that the Russian revolutions of 1905 and 1917, in different surroundings and under different circumstances, continued the work of the Commune and confirmed the historic analysis made by the genius of Marx, glazing it, doing tricks on it. And so that is where we will stop. That leads into Chapter 4, so we will come back and obviously read Chapter 4. Thanks for sitting in and reading today with me. I hope you enjoyed and hope you had fun. I don't know. I don't really have much commentary at the end. It's eye-opening, though, because I've never read any Lenin, and so it's just good to read it. But anyway, thank you. Thank you for watching, and I will surely be back to read Chapter 4. And until I see you next, take care of yourself and your community. All power to the people.